Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Donspektor here today, finally with another audio review. And I have for you the Tin T2. Is it the T2? No, it's a T2 Pro? No. It has to be the T2 Plus. No, right. It's the Tin T2 Evo. And yeah, this name scheme, as long as time goes with Tin Audio, it gets more confusing. It's, yeah, as I pick the third or fourth iteration of Tin T2s. And yeah, generally, I'm not sure what they wanted to improve on because the normal T2 was already pretty good. The T2 Plus was different, but still pretty good. And then they came with the Tin T2 Evo, which I don't know what evolution it is. Well, I think we're going to find out in this review. And of course, I'll be starting as usual with a quick unboxing and looking at the packaging and accessories. And yeah, this is the good packaging we have here. Standard tin packaging, if you've ever seen another tin audio product, including the T4, which was the latest tin product I actually sold because it just did not make me happy over the long term. So yeah, you get the thin cardboard box on the outside and then the sturdy thick cardboard on the inside with additional decoration, so that already looks pretty neat. And if you open that, then inside here would be the actual IEM. Removing it would be the accessories, which you get a dozen of silicone tips. Those are pretty decent, but more about that when we talk about comfort. Then you would get a carrying pouch, which is nothing special, but let me just here show you. So you have the tin thing on top. It feels definitely pretty cheap and artificial, but yeah, it will keep your IEMs reasonably packaged and safe. So no complaints here for 50 euros. And then last but not least, you get the famous T2 or the Tin Audio foam tips. And those are indeed pretty neat. They are a pretty dense tip, but it's still pretty, yeah, squishy. And it does fit most ears reasonably well. It's too thick for my ear canal though, but yeah, that's a pretty individual thing. And that's already it. I think packaging accessories for this price is definitively acceptable, and I would say pretty good because you even get a carrying pouch here. And the actually included tips, yeah, they're pretty decent here. More about that, as I said, when we talk about comfort. So then, next thing, before we go to cable, of course, we have to talk about the IEM build. So here is the good boy. And yes, if you've ever seen another tin audio IEM, this is pretty much resembling exactly what they had. So you get this aluminum chassis. It's the classic, they call it barrel style. Yeah, because apparently it is a barrel. And yeah, it has this front grille that is made out of a fine metal mesh. You got a pressure hole here and here. And then you have the classic MMCX connector with red and blue markings, which I definitely do like because this is really easy visible. And even if you don't see the connector here, you still have the red and blue marking on the actual IEM. So I really like that. But if you have ever seen the normal Tin T2 or the Tin T2 Pro, they look pretty much identical. Like, of course, they're a bit different, but in terms of build, this is nothing special. It's a tin audio product, so it's fine. And yeah, people complained about the MMCX connector breaking for them. So I've had the Tin T4, the Tin T2, and the Tin T2 Plus. And none of them had broken MMCX connectors, even after months of usage and regular usage. My Tin T4 though had a broke cable right out of the box, but I got a replacement cable without anyone asking. So again, thanks for Linsaw support here. So far it has always been going great with this company. So yeah, in general, I think this is a total fine IEM. It does feel durable, but as I said, other people complained that actually driver breaking or the cable, the MMCX connector breaking. I haven't experienced any of that, but your knowledge may vary. Then let's talk about the cable. And first I have to untangle it again. And I can already tell you this is a downgrade over what you get with the Tin T2 Plus, which I also get right into view here, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Tin T2 Plus, my favorite sub 100 euro IEM still, because I do like the way this one is tuned. Technicality wise, yeah, this is also a pretty decent performer, but this tuning actually, it hits most of my boxes. So my personal experience would be, if you want to get something around 50 euros, always get the T2 Plus. It's my personal taste here, but that's also why I'm not selling you a Tin T2 Plus here. No. I'm here to critique the Tin T2 Evo. And here, as you can see, let me just get the back of the cable out. So this is T2 Plus, this is T2 Evo. You get the exact same identical connector, you get the same identical cable thing, and then you can already see what a downgrade you get for the same price. This is more, it's thinner, it's definitely less smooth in usage, and also if you just look at that here, you can already see there's a tiny bend directly after the cable connect or the cable ends. This one does not have that, so it also feels overall more brittle in usage, and I expect this one to die sooner than actually the Tin T2 Plus cable will do. And when we go up to the splitter, well, yeah, that is also pretty much identical. I mean, it's aluminum tubes, right? There isn't much they can change here. Then going to the zip, so you can see the chin slider. That is just a bit bigger here because the cables are bigger. And I think the chin slider here does a better job than here when we talk about cable, because this one is a bit slidey. It slides a bit too much. It could be like 0.5 millimeter smaller in inner diameter. So this one does a better job though, but it's also much thinner cable. And when I had this, I was like, wee, this could be, yeah, J8 audio level. But actually, in fact, it reminded me more of the Shanling ME500, which had a pretty similarly, yeah, like just finely woven cable. And yeah, when we go up to the actually split here, you do have this thin cable, and then here again a thick rubberization. And these hooks are really, really big compared to other hooks. So I think if you have big ears, these will totally be fine. But if you have smaller ears, you probably want to try to bend them a bit inwards, like this stuff from the top. You want to bend them in a bit like that, because when I remounted it and it was first like this, it just flopped around. It's just too big for my ears. So I had to fix that and at least try to get it a bit smaller so it does go more tight over my ears. But in general, this is an okay-ish cable. It's not blonde bad, but it's also not T2 Plus good or other IEMs with better cables. It's fine, alright, it's nothing special. So then I think we can come to the next chapter. And this is comfort. And yeah, it almost pains me to say this is again a downgrade. I'm not sure why they actually choose again, you can see tangling up the cable, damn cable. So yeah, this is a downgrade from what you get with the Tin T2 Plus, because what the barrel shape does not have is like an, yeah, I would say ear ergonomic shape. You just flop it in your ear like that, directly like this. And this in turn leads to, with the very short nozzle, you can see the nozzle right about here. It's pretty short, it's like 3 millimeters long. And then you still have a few additional millimeters with the, like the stem here. But this overall adds to like a 5 millimeter, maybe 6 millimeter insert. And with most tips, actually the outer casing, so here from the thicker barrel, it just touches your ear. And if I get a really secure seal here, it's always the same, but the outer, the thicker thing just touches the outside of my ear canal, and it just gets uncomfortable after like 10 minutes or so. And this also had with the Tin T4, with the normal Tin T2, and not with the Tin T2 Plus, because this, ladies and gentlemen, let me just show you, utilizes a much more ear-shaped system. So you can already see directly in comparison, you don't get more insertion depth out of it, because the nozzle here is just a tiny bit longer, but because you have a more ear-shaped overall contour of the shell, it just fits much more comfortable in your ear. And yeah, it's still not the best fitting one, but it gets pretty comfy once you get the right tips. And even with the right tips with this one, they never get really comfortable to me, to my ear. So my favorite tips on this one were the Sedna EarFit, the normal version, because there's a shorter version and the longer version. And the longer version here just gave me the best fit. But because the tips are a bit hard, not the best comfort. Best comfort I got with the included foam tips, but then again I can't wear them for too long because they're just too big for my ear canal. And putting on any shorter silicone tips just flat out didn't work. It directly became uncomfortable after minutes or maybe maximum 10 minutes. And I have another problem if you use longer tips, because this thing is not like ear contour shaped, it's poking out of your ear. Right, let me just flip it around like that. It's poking out of your ear like that. And this creates like turbulence or like noises. And in German, we have this nice word. It's called Störgeräusch. Störgeräusch. And yeah, this word actually means you get like disturbances, interferences, and if you just walk on the outside with this IEM, it's much more prone for these Störgeräusche than most other IEMs I have had. And funnily, even the Tin T4, I don't remember being that prone to Störgeräusche, but somehow this one is. And also adding to this one unfortunately also has driver flags. The normal Tin T2 was, how many years ago did I try it? I don't remember if that had driver flags, I think a bit. The Tin T4 though didn't have driver flags for me, and this one does have. So when I use it again with silicone tips, I get an, from a scale 1 to 10, like maybe in 4 in driver flags. So if this really seals, you get some driver flags. It's not bad, but it's definitely, again, affecting the comfort in a negative way. So overall, summing up, this is a downgrade from the Tin T2 Plus. And yeah, I don't know, they should have used if they wanted to keep this tuning, the housing of the Tin T2 Plus, but they decided to go for the probably cheaper in production barrel type here. So comfort is not good, but it's also not catastrophically bad. Like the blonde BL03, those are definitely worse comforting for most years than this one. Then let's talk about isolation. And yeah, isolation is tightly woven with comfort, so I can already tell you this thing does not isolate well. Mostly problematic here will probably be the fit of the IEM, because you actually need to get good fit in your ear in order to isolate. And then again, you have the problem that the nozzle is too short, so actually this thing will probably touch your outer ear and it will get uncomfortable pretty fast. So when using silicone tips, this one does not isolate well, definitely quite a bit below average. Using thicker silicone tips, again the Zetna fit, the normal version I use here, those did isolate reasonably, but only the foam tips you got an isolation that I would call average. It's not good or anything, but it's definitely average with foam tips. So overall, this is not a well isolating IEM, and I would not recommend it for on the go in city center or in trams or subways or wherever. And this already brings me to drivability. Last chapter before we get into the core aspect, the sound. And yeah, on paper, the Tin T2 Evo, again I almost said plus, it has 32 ohms. And yeah, this means, I think sensitivity, I don't know, I would have to look up sensitivity, so I just say it's high enough, right? It would make it pretty much drivable from all sources. And in reality, yeah, that is pretty much true, close of being true. So I could drive the Tin T2 Evo here from almost everything. I threw it in my smartphone, it worked totally fine. I threw it in my laptop, it worked fine. My other work laptop worked fine. Even the system audio of my computer, of my PC, on the mainboard, which is definitely not good quality, it also worked fine. Of course with background noises, but it was fine. Going a bit higher up in the power hierarchy to something like the BTR5, I think you did get a bit of an improvement, I think especially in stage size and imaging, but only when you go even higher up from there to the SP200, you do get I would say the most out of it. And this is a pretty interesting case, because I think this thing actually can scale with more power, but it's just and it's a little noticeable, right? So in terms of how much percentage you get, I think 85% on your smartphone is totally reasonable. You still get most of what the Evo here is capable, but not all. And only going to something crazy powerful like the SP200 here, this will give you all of the imaging capabilities or all of the layering capabilities this one can do, but it's also again pretty unreasonable to use that. So just say something like your BTR5 or anything, it will be totally sufficient to drive it, and you will get like 99% out of it. Just going more up will get you a bit more. And yeah, one last thing about drivability. Because this one, not going to spoil you the sound signature yet, I do prepare it on tubes. So if you have a portable tube amp or a portable tube DAC, I would really strongly suggest you trying it with tubes. It gets better with tubes, I can definitely tell you that. But yeah, this is so much about drivability. Let's go to comfort, to sound. And also a neat party trick that this IEM can do. The magnets are so strong, you can see them sticking together. Whoop. That's pretty neat. That's a party trick I think the T2 Evo has. Okay, no, let's come to sound. So, general sound characteristics. I think you have probably read the title, and yeah, let's start from the bottom. There's normal, there's bright, Where's brighter? There's the sun, and then here is Tin T2 Evo. It's a really bright sounding IEM, and it's like they thought after they had the Tin T2, the normal T2, and then the Tin T2 Pro, which was obviously too sharp. They thought, okay, so ladies and gentlemen, how can we top it? People did like the bright signature of the Tin T2, but we didn't like so much the Tin T2 Pro. What can we do? And somebody was like, add more treble. And then the dude responsible for product was like, yes, treble worked so well before. We add all of the treble. And then they added all of the treble they had. And this, yeah, it really literally, it's like, it's cranked up to 9,000 or over 9,000. And this means you do get in like 10 to 11 decibel gain from 1K to 6K. It's absurdly bright. And I think the most bright audio product I've ever had the, I want to say, joy experiencing. And of course, if you like bright IEMs, I think this is not wrong, right? So it still has qualities going on for it when we talk later on more about sound. But it's so absurdly bright, I think most people will just not be satisfied with what they be getting here. And yeah, then I would say let's break down the frequency response. And I'm going to show you the graph while I talk about the frequency response from time to time. But keep in mind, I'm not evaluating IEMs on how they measure, because this will lead you to pretty false assumptions on how it is in real life, which it just isn't. I'm just using the graph as a kind of reference point to show you like how it does on a purely objective standpoint. Because as I said, purely objective, there's a 10 to 11 decibel gain here, so that's absurd. But generally from a more subjective standpoint, this is not as bad as it might look on the graph. And yeah, now I'm talking about treble that we can already start. So extension-wise, the Tin T2 Evo does a good job. There's a fair amount of air for the price, and there's also a pretty decent amount of detail in the upper treble on the air frequencies. This means especially for more atmospheric tracks, and here I've noted down Multivitamin Juice Part 1 from Ovane. After 3 minutes you have this like atmospheric like wind-like noises. It goes like and going really high frequencies, and that is audible with this IEM really well. And of course you have to talk about balance, because this is audible because around like I think 8K you still have like a 10 decibel gain over mids. So of course it will be well audible, but even after that, it does sound like there's more air going on than the graph would actually indicate. And this, I think, is a good thing about the Tin T2 Evo. In the upper treble frequencies, it does sound more balanced than it actually would look like on the graph. And yeah, I think for 50 euros, or for $50, depending on which country you buy this, I think you actually get a pretty good detail in the upper treble regions. It's maybe the best I've heard around this price point, just in upper treble region detail. But again, this is so bright. When we go lower down, which I'll be doing now, I think this could be one of those things. This is just because this is a super bright IEM, you just have the feeling it's more detailed than it actually is. It's a bit difficult to distinguish here between like real detail and just detail caused by the high treble gain and the frequency response in general. So yeah, when we go further down, as I said, there's a really high gain of like 10 to 11 decibels. And for some songs, let me clarify that. For some songs, you don't really hear this gain as brutal as it actually is. I did note Jasmine from the album 4.17 PM from the band with Bird's Eye View and Katsutoshi. Okay, sorry, I don't have the name noted down, but you were able to find it. Actually, in this track, it did sound quite balanced to me. I was surprised that it actually did not sound so bad in all stuff. It was just a bit too sharp, especially when vocals appeared, but it was really not as bad as I actually expected. And Weight of the World with female vocals, man, same story. It did sound pretty balanced with just a tad of too much of sharpness. And yeah, electric guitars and cymbals, I think they also did work reasonably well. They did have a good bite, they were not overpowering the main mix, and cymbals are really well detailed for 50 euros here. Again, could be just my perception here, but it's not too much out of space. It is overpowering our frequencies, no question here, but if you just look at the graph, you can be fooled in thinking this is going to sound terrible. It just doesn't. It doesn't sound well balanced, but it doesn't sound terrible. And this also means you have when you come again detail, I think you get a really nice splash and sizzle quality that just overshadows mids, but it actually is not as bad as graph indicates again. And if we go down to lower treble and upper mids, I'm just going to summon those up in a chapter. Yeah, there's a constant gain here. So this means female vocals will be pretty well understandable, but because the gain is actually starting in the right region, they are not too forward. This means you will maybe be getting a bit of shout, but it's not too terrible. And overall, I did never have the feeling this was a shouty IEM. It again could be just because it's super bright. And the gain is kind of controlled, so it's not the most terrible one. But it's also definitely in the sharper side. This means you do get pretty detailed vocals though. In Caged Bird from Eli Arson, the vocals were very, very nice on point and really well audible, even though the track is not mixed to be having that well audible vocals. They were just pretty sharp. And they were not as sharp as, for example, with the TFC Essence, which is a horrible sharp IEM in every aspect, but they were relatively sharp. Weight of the Wall, to come back again, had also really well audible vocals, female vocals again, so no problem here. And yeah, then again, my favorite example if you talk about sharpness is the song Zero from Sidewalks and Skeletons. This is like a synthwave track, and oh boy, the vocals in here, or how the song is mixed, it gets so sharp so fast. And this actually was not the worst presentation I've had in Zero from Sidewalks and Skeletons. Again, the TFC Essence was far more insulting in this regard. And yeah, this brings me to mids. Yeah, the Tin T2, normal one, it had really good mids, at least judging from my memory here. And the Tin T2 Evo, I must say again, plus, no, I'm not talking about you. It does kind of continue here, but it just has the main problem here that it's so not balanced, but the mids kind of get lost in the upper mids and in the lower treble region. It is just lost in terms of how well it's balanced. This doesn't mean the mids don't have a decent detail though. You do get pretty decent vocals and instruments being here. Yeah, I did note down the vocals, for instance, in Blood Brothers or Brave New World from Iron Maiden. We had a really nice clarity to it and also a good presence. But then again, the instruments kick in and it's just out of balance again. And a similar story to All of In My Hands from Metallica S&M2. Again, vocals had a really good clarity and good presence. But as soon as when you have more going on, it just starts to get out of whack and the balance starts to drift off. This also means like S and F noises, especially for Iron Maiden, they were just too bright or too extreme at some points. Definitely not in good balanced presentation. However, giving you another example here that actually shows this can also go completely out of whack and ruin the whole song. Catharsis from Nightcrawler. This has already pretty sharp vocals in a more like upper mid, like mids to upper mids region. And this vocalist, he's in, I don't know who he is, I think, I don't know who the name of this vocalist. It gets totally out of whack. It's like, it's totally unbalanced. It gets so sharp. The S's and F's, oh my god. Literally, it doesn't happen often that I just want to have the IM and rip it out of my ears. This one managed it. I just didn't want to listen to the song anymore. It just was too much. And yeah, I think that's most about main mids. Going to lower mids, it's pretty linear, right? It has a tiny gain depending on the tips. I'm going to put on a graph in between, where it just shows the difference between tips. It does get a tiny bit V-shapish, just a tiny bit, when you put on the right tips, but it's really not worth mentioning with this treble gain. It just is lost. So it's pretty linear, it's not good, it's not bad. Lower mids are understandable well, but they don't have, I think, the clarity of a normal mids here. And this brings me to the last region every IEM has to master. And I think, again, here the Tin T2 Plus does master it much better. This is bass. And yeah, for most flat / neutral / brighter IEMs, I don't expect it to be bassy, right? I don't expect the bass to be punchy. I don't expect the bass to be nicely textured. And here in particular, it just doesn't deliver. Even for a more neutral IEM, this one just doesn't deliver on the bass region. It doesn't have, I think, the detail and the texture even other neutral IEMs have. And it also, of course, it doesn't have any punch. So you are getting underwhelmed most of the time. This means in particular bass guitars, After the Rain, Small Cigarette, Jasmine von the, oh yeah, I've noted the name, Katsutoshi Morizono. They some of you are dull. Bass guitars feel like, yeah, they feel like lifeless. You do get a pretty decent detail though, but it just feels lifeless overall. Something like the Shanding ME500 is a good example for another IEM that is pretty neutral or flat in this region, or over yes with Zandara as well. There's some of much more life going on here, and yeah, they are completely different price points, but just this is not an IEM that delivers in this regard. So if you like bass guitars, I would really not recommend the Tin T2 Evo here. Going to mid bass. Yeah, story continues, it just lacks the detail, it lacks the texture other IEMs at this price point have. However, one thing I did note though, it does do a better job in terms of delivering different like bass notes or different distinguishing between bass notes than for example the Mele did before my Mele died. And yeah, sorry I cannot deliver the Mele review next week because my Mele just died on me. Like the right side just, I used it for like an hour or so, when I put it away, put it on again, when the right side was dead. So I have to go an RMA in there. So yeah, next week it will be something else. I'm not entirely sure what I manage. So yeah, this is not a good point as well. It's similar to upper bass, really nothing mentioning here. However, I did notice speed was pretty decent, especially on better amplifications. Speed was something where I was like, okay, this at least delivers on the speed region here. For this price, it's pretty decent. Then we come to the last point in bass, extension. And of course we are using Hans Zimmer here. Hans Zimmer is our expert in sub-bass notes. And my favorite example here, Interstellar's Mountains. There's a sub-bass note that starts around like 2 minutes, 2 seconds or so. And it goes on all the way down to like 20 hertz, maybe even 10 hertz. I'm not entirely sure. Like it really goes down all the way. And really good IEMs, they can maintain texture to around about 2 minutes 16, a tiny bit before that. This is like the best of the best. Like you can get better than that, at least not audible. Maybe felt but not audible. And this one actually managed until respectable 2 minutes 14. And this is like a good 2 minutes 14. Not like, yeah, it's a barely, no, it's 2 minutes 14. Of course, as a not bassy IEM, you don't get texture where you just know or you just hear there is a sub-bass note. You can't distinguish it from anything else, but as a sub-bass note going on until 2 minutes 14. So for this price, I would say this extension and for this signature, this is a pretty remarkable experience you get here with the extension. It's not good or anything, but seriously, for IEM this bright, managing 2 minutes 14 Interstellar's Mountains, this had my respect at least a tiny bit. So yeah, I think that sums about everything up about general frequency response. Let's talk about dynamics and detail retrieval. And sorry for glancing over this aspect in other reviews before. I tried to summon dynamics detail retrieval up. Not because they're identical, but because, again, it's an alliteration, dynamics detail retrieval. I like alliteration, sorry, yeah. So let's start with micro detail. Micro detail, pretty good. For this price, certainly really good. And I think this is one of those cases where it's pretty difficult to distinguish between just the illusion of detail and the real detail. Because of an IEM this bright, yeah, you will be hearing most of the upper frequencies or like the upper tones. And you will just get most of that other IEMs might be losing on here. So actually it feels like you have a really good amount of micro details here for this price, right? And this carries over to, I think, at least partly from treble, when you go down to mids, like there's some pretty good microdynamic detail here. Only you lose out in, as I said, in bass region, it just doesn't manage to maintain the microdynamics in bass detail. So that is lost on you. But it's still totally fine for this price, and I would not overall call this IEM pretty detailed sounding IEM for the price. I did make a few notes where I did like a detail retrieval for this price. It's Blade Runner Blues, definitely pretty good liking. Multivitamin Juice Part 1 again from Ovane. Macabre Serenade as well from Nightcrawler. And I think this IEM in particular at bad other IEMs at this price point like the Blonde BLO 5S or the KZ-ZIX. Even for the latter one has BAs, this one just came off as more detailed. more dynamic, I mean, more detailed in the dynamic department. And, but yeah, we can also summon about detail. The felt detail here is definitely higher than the other IEM. So I think that's everything I can say about detail retrieval here. But macro dynamics, sorry, I mixed things here, I'm sorry for that. Yeah, macro detail or macro dynamics is not that great. It's a pretty bright IEM, and yeah, it just lacks, I think, the macro dynamics of IEM will have. So you do get a pretty good macro dynamic in terms of the lowest note and the highest note. Those are nice, but in terms of like how notes can be perceived, like how quiet and mid frequency, low frequency is compared to how quiet and air frequency would be. Yeah, it's just totally out of whack. You always have the upper frequencies taking over, and it just doesn't feel like it's a like well balanced IEM in terms of macro dynamics. This also means like you have more higher treble frequencies that always sound like they're having a better job in, I think, macro details when you have like something like at 6K and then at 10K. Better distinguishable than something you have at like, I don't know, like let's say 100 Hertz and 300 Hertz. I think this is one of those cases where the frequency response also tells you that the dynamics in these regions just won't hold up. And yeah, this is probably a more felt thing, but it's not a dynamic IEM, right? It's not good. Microdynamics for this price, yes. Macrodynamics not. And this brings me to soundstage, layering, and imaging. And yeah, I think this is one of those cases where you again get the best out of it if you use an amplifier. So putting it on a BTR5 gives you more stage, it gives you more height, more width, but it gives you a more bright signature as well. So really, I didn't like BTR5 of those. And going to the SP200 still improved a tiny bit on that, like maybe 1 to 2%. But yeah, overall I think the capabilities in soundstage, imaging, and layering of this one is pretty decent. On BTR5 or SP200 you do get not only 3 blobs, you usually get like 5 layers, and what this one is pretty good at, it separates the layers, when those are your ears, directly in the center of your ears. You see the point on my underground, directly where the point is would be the ears. This is a pretty good job for vocal separation at least. And it also does reasonably well in a like 3D space around here in a circle, like left and right of your ear. It's reasonably well here. For 50 euros, definitely no slouch here. And yeah, similar thing is I think for imaging wise, if you want to game with these, it does pretty decently. It even worked so well that I had it on my BTR5 and SP200, but I was like, oh okay, I think I can game with these. And I did try Sandstorm and Hand Showdown, and those work really nice. I could pinpoint enemies really well, better than other IEMs to be honest. But again, then you have for atmosphere, the lower regions were just missing. So explosions that you like rumble, anything, it just didn't come off as nicely atmospheric. For competitiveness, yes, but fun, no. And yeah, I think this is already everything I can say about soundstage, layering, and imaging. Yeah, it's decent for the price, but no, pretty good, I could even say, but not probably the best for this aspect. And this brings me to the verdict. So, as somebody who would say for himself, I am definitely team treble, not so much team bass, I still would not recommend the Tin T2 Evo. As I said, brighter, sun, Tin T2 Evo. It's just too much. It just feels like, yeah, they cranked up treble to 9000 and thought this was a good idea. Just doesn't work. I also think the overall timbre, I'm not sure how to pronounce it in English, is just off. It just never sounds quite right to my ears. And this carries on for like everything I've heard it. Nothing sounded quite right. It didn't sound terrible though, but it just wasn't correct. Then you have the Tin T2 Plus here though, let me just get my body here. It also had this like bright characteristic the tin sound profile has going on. But it just felt overall much more balanced, much more natural. It just was overall the better IEM in terms of balancing. And this is also why I would not recommend it, because this is just not an evolution, this is more like a downgrade. It just doesn't feel right in no song. It doesn't feel too wrong, but also it never works perfectly. And yeah, also when you have the fitting problems with the barrel type here, which they could have fixed, but decided to not do so. So there are so many points this IEM has problems with, but I just cannot recommend you the Tin T2 Evo. If you like really bright headphones, I think this could be a good pick for you, because there are not many so bright headphones around this price point. But if you just want a brighter or more balanced IEM, well, there's the normal Tin T2 if you don't like bass at all. If you like a bit of bass and sub bass, well, there's the Tin T2 Plus. And so I don't see a market for this IEM yet. It just doesn't quite work out. And yeah, after this really long review, I hope anybody finishes it. And yeah, if you have any questions, if you have remarks, if you have critique, please leave a comment. And with this, Donspektor out.